They repainted my dead husband's study without asking me. That's the moment I stopped smiling on the inside. But on the outside, I poured the champagne myself. Hello everyone. My name is Anna, I'm 71 years old, and if this is your first time here, welcome. You're about to hear exactly what happens when a family assumes an old woman is too soft, too sentimental, and too tired to fight back. Before I go any further, if stories like this keep you glued to your seat, hit that like button right now, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them, and honestly, knowing you're all out there listening is what gets me through telling this story at all. Now, pour yourself something warm, get comfortable, because this one still makes my hands shake a little when I think about it. Let me start at the beginning because you need to understand what that cabin meant before you understand what they did to it. My husband's name was Robert. We were married for 44 years, and for 40 of those years, we saved every spare dollar we could scrape together for a little piece of land up in the mountains. Not a fancy place. Not one of those glass and steel vacation homes you see in magazines. Just a modest log cabin, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and a view of a valley that turned gold every October. Robert built the stone fireplace himself, one weekend at a time, over the course of nearly 2 years. He used to say that fireplace would outlive both of us. I used to laugh at him for saying such a morbid thing. Then, 5 years ago, cancer took him, and I sat alone in front of that very fireplace for the first winter without him, and I understood exactly what he meant. That cabin became more than a vacation home after Robert died. It became the only place where I still felt him close to me. His study. A small room off the back with a roll-top desk and shelves of paperback westerns he never got around to finishing. I kept exactly as he left it. His reading glasses were still sitting on the desk. His half-finished crossword puzzle was still folded on the armrest of his chair. I didn't touch a single thing in that room for 5 years, not out of morbid obsession, but because some rooms are meant to hold a person's memory the way a jar holds water, carefully and without spilling. My son Ethan is 39 now. Good boy mostly. Soft-hearted, easily led, and married to a woman named Brooke who has spent the better part of a decade convincing him that his mother is, in her words, a little too attached to the past. Brooke and Ethan have 2 children, my grandchildren Lily and Noah, ages 11 and 8, and I love those 2 kids more than my own life. That love is exactly what Brooke has always used against me. Started small, the way these things always do. A comment here about how the cabin just sits empty most of the year. A suggestion there about how it would be so much more practical if someone actually lived in it full-time instead of it being a museum for a dead man. I brushed it off every single time, because I never in 1,000 years imagined my own daughter-in-law would act on those comments without my permission. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I got a call from my neighbor up at the lake, a sweet retired schoolteacher named Ivy who has lived 2 properties down from my cabin for almost 15 years. She called me sounding confused, almost apologetic, and asked if I knew that a moving truck had pulled up to my cabin that morning. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I told her no, I had no idea, and I asked her to please tell me exactly what she was seeing. She described a large truck, several men carrying furniture, boxes stacked on my porch, the one Robert built with his own hands, and children's bicycles being unloaded onto my lawn. She said she saw a young woman directing the movers like she owned the place. I didn't call Ethan. I didn't call Brooke. I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I got in my car that same afternoon and drove 4.5 hours straight to that mountain, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles ached the entire way. When I pulled into the gravel drive, the sun was starting to set behind the ridge, and I could see lights on in every window of my cabin. My cabin. Music was playing. There was laughter drifting out through the screen door. For one strange, aching moment, it almost looked beautiful, like the house was finally alive again after years of quiet mourning. And then I stepped inside, and beautiful was not the word that came to mind anymore. New curtains hung in the living room. A garish floral pattern that clashed violently with Robert's handmade furniture. Boxes were half unpacked in every corner. Someone had rearranged the bookshelves. And then I walked toward the back of the house, toward Robert's study, and I froze in the doorway. The walls, once a deep forest green that Robert had chosen himself because it reminded him of the pines outside, had been painted a bright, cheerful yellow. His roll-top desk was pushed against the wall, covered in someone else's mail. His reading glasses were gone. I later found them tossed carelessly into a junk drawer in the kitchen, like they were nothing more than clutter to be dealt with. I stood in that doorway and I could not breathe. Brooke came around the corner at that exact moment, holding a paint roller, wearing one of my late husband's old flannel shirts like an apron, and when she saw me, she didn't even flinch. She smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Anna, you're early, we were going to surprise you this weekend. Doesn't it look so much brighter in here?" Brighter. She called erasing my husband's memory brighter. Ethan came out from the kitchen looking sheepish, avoiding my eyes the way he used to when he was 7 years old and had broken something he wasn't supposed to touch. Lily and Noah ran up and hugged my legs, completely unaware that anything was wrong, and that alone kept me from unraveling right there on the spot. Brooke explained it all so casually, like she was describing a pleasant weekend project instead of a full-scale invasion. She said they'd decided, as a family, that the cabin was wasted sitting empty most of the year while I lived 3 states away in my own home. She said Ethan's job had gone fully remote, so they thought it made perfect sense to relocate the family up to the mountains permanently. She said they figured I'd be thrilled to have grandchildren filling the house with life again. Not one phone call. Not one text message. Not one single word asking whether this was something I might want, or whether I had feelings about a stranger, because that is exactly what Brooke was to that house, a stranger, repainting the one room in the world where I still felt my husband's presence. Here is where I need you to understand something about me, and about the choice I made in that doorway. I am 71 years old. I have buried a husband. I have raised a son alone through some very dark years. And in 71 years of living, I have learned exactly one lesson better than any other. Never let people see your anger in the moment they've earned it. Save it. Let it settle. Let it turn into something useful instead of something loud. So I smiled. I told Brooke the curtains were lovely. I told Ethan the kids looked so happy. I let Noah show me his new bedroom, and I told him it looked wonderful, even though it used to be my sewing room. And that night, when Brooke pulled out a bottle of champagne to celebrate the new chapter, I sat down at my own kitchen table, in the home my husband built, and I let her pour me a glass. I raised that glass and I toasted to new beginnings. They had no idea what those words actually meant. Because here is the piece of information that Brooke, in her rush to redecorate my husband's memory, never bothered to ask about. That cabin was never in my name and Ethan's name jointly. It was never held in some family trust that Brooke assumed she'd eventually inherit her way into. That cabin, every log, every stone in that fireplace Robert built with his own 2 hands, was in my name and my name alone, exactly the way Robert and I set it up decades ago, specifically so that no one, not a bank, not a lawsuit, not even our own son's future spouse, could ever lay claim to it without my consent. I let them celebrate that whole evening. I watched Lily and Noah chase fireflies off the porch. I listened to Brooke talk about her plans for a garden, plans for a new deck, plans, for a house that was never hers to plan for. I went to bed that night in the guest room, because my own bedroom had already been claimed, and I lay awake for a long time, not with rage, but with something colder and steadier. Clarity. At 6 the next morning, before anyone else in that house had stirred, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and my cell phone, and I called a man named Mr. Whitfield, the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate 5 years earlier and who I trusted with my life. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting the way good lawyers do, and when I finished he asked me one simple question. "Anna, do you want them out, or do you want to teach them a lesson first?" I told him I wanted both. By 9 that morning the whole house was awake, and Brooke came downstairs already talking about paint swatches for the front porch. I let her finish her sentence. Then I set my coffee cup down on the table, folded my hands, and told her and Ethan we needed to sit down. I told them calmly that I appreciated their enthusiasm, but that what they had done was move an entire family into a home without the owner's permission, made irreversible alterations to a room that held deep personal meaning to me, and assumed ownership of a property that was never legally theirs to assume. I watched Brooke's smile falter for the first time since I'd arrived. I watched Ethan's face go pale. Then I told them about the paperwork Mr. Whitfield had already begun drawing up the night before. A formal notice, effective immediately, requiring them to vacate the property within 30 days, the maximum courtesy the law required of me, though I made it very clear I was under no obligation to give them even that much. Brooke's composure cracked completely. She accused me of being cruel, of being controlling, of punishing innocent children for their parents' decisions. And I want you to hear exactly what I said back to her, because I have never been prouder of my own restraint. I told her that no child was being punished. The children would go right on being loved and housed by their parents, in whatever home their parents chose to build for them honestly, through their own means, with their own name on the deed. What I would not do, I told her, was reward an act of trespass, because that is precisely what it was, dressed up in floral curtains and fresh yellow paint, by simply accepting it and moving on. Ethan tried to smooth things over the way he always has, caught between his mother and his wife, but for the first time in years I did not let him. I told him directly that he was 39 years old, and that somewhere along the way he had let his wife make a decision on my property without ever once picking up the phone to ask his own mother's permission, and that silence was its own kind of betrayal. He had nothing to say to that. There was nothing to say. I gave them one more piece of information before I left that porch. I told them that Robert's study would be repainted back to its original color, at their expense, before the 30 days were up, and that his reading glasses, which I had already retrieved from that junk drawer and placed gently in my purse, would be going home with me where they belonged. I drove home alone that afternoon, and I will not pretend to you that it didn't hurt. It hurt terribly. There is a particular kind of grief in watching people you love reveal exactly how little they respected you when they thought you wouldn't notice. But there is also a particular kind of strength in discovering, at 71 years old, that you are still fully capable of standing up for the memory of the man you loved, and for the home he built with his own hands. It has been 3 weeks since that morning on the porch. Ethan and Brooke moved out on schedule into a modest rental 2 towns over, and the last I heard, Brooke has not spoken to me since. Ethan calls once a week now, quieter than he used to be, but more honest too. Last weekend, he asked if he could bring Lily and Noah up to the cabin, just the 3 of them, to help me repaint Robert's study back to forest green. I said yes before he even finished asking. We spent that Saturday with paint rollers in our hands, the windows open, the smell of pine drifting in from outside, and somewhere around noon, Noah found Robert's old reading glasses sitting on the desk where I had placed them back, and he asked me who they belonged to. I told him about his grandfather. I told him about the fireplace, about the 2 years it took to build, about the crossword puzzles he never finished. For the first time, that little boy sat still and listened to me for almost 20 minutes straight, and when we finished painting that evening, the room was green again, and it finally felt like mine again, like ours again. I don't know exactly what the future holds with Brooke. Maybe time will soften things. Maybe it won't. But I know this much for certain. I am not the frail, sentimental old woman she assumed she could quietly push aside. I am a 71-year-old widow who spent 44 years building a life and a legacy with a good man, and I will not apologize for protecting what's left of him, not for anyone, and not for a single fresh coat of paint. If this story moved you even a little tonight, I'd be so grateful if you'd hit that like button, subscribe for more stories like this one, and tell me once more in the comments where you're tuning in from. I truly love reading through every single one. And if there is an older woman in your life who has ever been underestimated by someone younger who thought she wouldn't notice, wouldn't push back, or wouldn't fight, send her this video. Sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do isn't raise her voice. It's pour the champagne, smile through the evening, and quietly call her lawyer in the morning. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story. Anna.